Hello my dears, it's Katie and I am vlogging my reread of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. For those of you who don't know, this is arguably my favorite book. I love this book so much that it is very, very hard for me to express my feelings. But for those of you who don't know what this is about, brief summary, this follows a small creature called a hobbit, and his name is Bilbo. Goes on a quest adventure with 13 dwarves and a wizard named Gandalf to get back their homeland and their gold and their fortune. That's the long and short of this story. Part of my reason for vlogging this is because there's just so much stigma surrounding Tolkien, and in particular The Hobbit. I know so many people that don't love this book, don't like it even, and just find it to be very simple, simplistic, and honestly to be very it's a children's book. And in a lot of ways that is correct. It is a children's book. Tolkien told his children this story at bedtime. Like, that's kind of how he created it in the first place. That's not the reason he created it, but that's just, they were his beta readers basically. And it brings me so much joy that he did that with his kids. But kind of the reason he wrote this in the first place was because Tolkien was first and foremost a Norse scholar. Like, he was a philologist, and brings Norse, particularly works like Beowulf and the Volsung sagas and things of that sort, and you see a lot of elements from that in The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and The Silmarillion. The Hobbit was written because England didn't have their own kinds of epic tales. He was, a lot of people argue that Beowulf was, no one knows. No one knows who wrote it or exactly 100% sure where it came from. So Tolkien is like, you know what? We need our own dragon lore. We need our own adventure story. I'm gonna write that. So he did that. And if you look closely at it, it has quite a bit of influence from Beowulf. And I won't say too much more than that, but I'm going to warn you now, this vlog will have spoilers, but I am going to keep it spoiler-free for the first clip because I want you guys to read this book. But definitely come watch the rest after you've read it, because I'm going to have a lot of interesting and important things to say, and that is partially the reason that I am vlogging this. But on top of that, The Hobbit is a very multi-layered, multifaceted work. A lot of people just look at it on face value and is like, yeah, it's a children's story. It reads like a children's story. Not a lot happens. There's not a lot of detail. Whatever. Guys, let me tell you, there is so much to this book. So much. Like, I've already started my reread of it, and I'm buddy reading it with a couple of friends, one who's read it, one who hasn't, and I can tell you, like, I am seeing this through completely different eyes, and reading with a buddy this time around is fascinating because I'm getting their take on things, their perspectives, like things that they're picking up on that I'm like, whoa, I actually never thought about that before. Cool, love that. But I mean, there is a reason this book is so timeless. Like, it is an any age book. And I'm just like, we know how much I don't like age ranges. Like, I didn't even know they existed until a couple of years ago, kind of a thing. One thing that I love so much about this is how much of Tolkien's love of history and philology gets just interspersed in here. It's such a happy book. And just such a joy for me to read, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on it with you guys. So without further ado, I'm gonna cut to the footage of me walking through some things as I read, and we'll go from there. First chapter is called The Unexpected Party. And this introduces us to hobbits and to Bilbo as a character, and Gandalf and all of the dwarves, and it's just a lovely introduction. But just talking about some of my favorite points, but just the first sentence of this book always brings me so much joy, happiness, comfort, just all of these positive feelings. Like, a lot of people talk about back to Hogwarts, just it feels like coming home. Well, that's kind of what this book feels for me in so many ways. Like, Harry Potter does that too, but in some ways The Hobbit does just a little bit more. But the first line is, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." It's such a joy, just such a joy. And like, even the first paragraph, honestly, is the best, because then it continues and it says, "Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole, with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort." Yes, it does. It does mean comfort, and I love it. So now moving on to Bilbo and Gandalf's first encounter. I love that whole encounter. It is just a joy. Like, as a nerd, as a lover of language, it is an experience. And that is the part where Bilbo walks out of his house and he says good morning, and that just leads to a whole chaotic adventure, which I love. I love it so much, right? Okay, so he says, "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo. Like, guys, just the amount of interpretation that you can have from that one phrase is just lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. And that's just all of his philologist soul seeping out into his work. And he does that a lot throughout his works, but I just, at least upon this reread, because it's been quite a few years since I've reread this, and we get to see quite a bit of it in The Hobbit, and I love that. Just their whole interaction is just lovely and hilarious, and just, to me, very relatable, and it's just like so peaceful and happy, and just it's so good. And then later, Bilbo has quite a few unexpected, uninvited guests that show up at his house, primarily like 13 dwarves and Gandalf. And it is just a situation because Bilbo is being recruited as a burglar to make their party not be 13, because unlucky number. And Bilbo's like, "Excuse me? Please tell me more about this thing before I agree to it." Just so relatable. But then we also, another thing that I love about Tolkien's work is he scatters songs throughout his works. And I love that because he does a lot of world building and background through his songs and his riddles and poems and things that are scattered throughout. And I'm just like, yes, give it to me in this unique and unusual way that never gets utilized in other works. Like other authors, you tend not to see it. It's not a very common thing, I find. But I love it because it's such an easy way that captures you and makes you more interested. And then like, he's like, "Okay, remember that thing I mentioned before? Now I'm going to expand on it as the story goes on and as it becomes more and more relevant. But here, let me give you this background so you understand what's going on and what happened and everything." And it just brings me so much joy to have that scattered throughout, and it's just, I love it so much. And if you guys watch the movies, which if you have, fine, they are not my favorite adaptation, slash they're not good. They made it into 3. It did not need to be 3. They added things that should not have been in there, and I'm pretty bitter about it. But if you guys remember the song Misty Mountains Cold, or at least that's the title they gave it there, it gives you a lot of background into what happened to them and all of that. Then we get to one of the funniest parts for me. Like, Bilbo is such a cautious creature, but I love the legal hilarity surrounding it all. All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he, obstinately putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? And I'm just like, relatable. I love him so much. It's just so funny. Then we get on to chapter 2, which is roast mutton. And now this chapter is lovely because Bilbo decides ultimately that he is going to go on this quest journey thing. He agreed to it. He's going to go on this quest. And then this is the chapter where his arc begins. The part where he's like, you know, I said I'm a burglar. I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to go steal some food. And he gets himself into so much trouble. He runs into some trolls. And he comes up with a very unique name for himself. Unintentionally, of course, but it's Tolkien's philology skills shining through once again. And he calls himself a burrow hobbit, which is burglar and hobbit combined into one thing. Did Tolkien invent ship names or cross-species names? I think so. I think that's what's happening here. But then, you know, he's got himself into all of this trouble, and it's just hilarious. And then Gandalf comes and saves them. Don't know it's Gandalf at first, but it is. He says, "Dawn take you all and be stone to you," said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't. It's just a joy. And also just the portrayal of Thorn in this. He's just such a lovely person, and I really enjoyed his portrayal in the book so much more than the movies. In the movies, he's such an angsty boy, and I'm just like, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but also, like, please. But I do love Richard Armitage. That voice. His voice is gorgeous. Anyway, the part where Gandalf comes back, because they're like, where did he go? He's like, and Thorin is literally like, where did you go, if I may ask? Said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. To look ahead, said he. And what brought you back in the nick of time? Looking behind, he said. Exactly, said Thorin, but could you be more plain? And then Gandalf proceeds to explain his life while he was away, which I love, because Tolkien is like a master at that, honestly. He does such a good job of explaining information about where he was in such a way that it doesn't feel like info dumping. It feels like just enough, and it feels like it just placed perfectly. I just really like it. I don't know. There's just something about the style of it really works. Now, chapter 3 is a short rest, and this is a lot of just journeying. They go to Rivendell. We got some songs shoved in there once again, and the elves are interesting. They're very Fae-like in this portrayal. Like, they're very actually quite different from the way that they're portrayed in The Lord of the Rings, which I find really, really interesting. Yeah, I love how that all works out. But then once again, we get to see Elrond, and then also more Tolkien philology things. He's such a language nerd, and it makes my heart so happy. Like, have I talked to you guys about how these books, this book and The Lord of the Rings, just really got me into wanting to learn ancient medieval mythology, linguistics, philology things, because they did that. I talk about runes of all these different kinds, but then also like scatter in some history, because and this is maybe not a spoiler, depending on if you've seen the movies or read the books, but dwarves and elves do not get along for a variety of reasons that I won't go into because it's not necessary for this this particular conversation. But one thing that I really like is like you get some of that historical background in like a paragraph, and it is just perfectly relevant to the specific part of the story that you're reading. So for instance, Elrond knew all about runes of every kind. That day he looked at the swords they had brought from the troll's lair, and he said, "These are not troll-made. They are old swords, very old swords of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde or goblin plunder, for dragons and goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. This Thorin, the rune's name Orcrist, the goblin cleaver in the ancient tongue of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. This Gandalf was Glamdring, foe hammer, that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well." It's just like that bit of history into elven culture and elven lore is just perfect. And I mean, you find out more history about some of these things in the Silmarillion. Different conversation. But I love how tied together all of it is and how relevant a lot of that is even now. And it's just one of my favorite things. And then we get to talking about moon letters and how they differ from rune letters, and just the riddle that comes from the moon letters, and that is, "Stand by the grey stone where the thrush knocks," read Elrond, "and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole." And just then you find out about Durin's Day, which is part of Dwarvish culture and Dwarvish customs, and that's kind of an important thing, and it's just great. Okay, I love it a whole lot. And then Overhill and Underhill, which is first of all hilarious because if you don't know, Frodo's kind of alias that he comes up for himself in The Lord of the Rings is Underhill, and just it originated from The Hobbit. Like, that is a thing that happened, and I love it a lot. Great. We're having a great time. And so this one, they leave Rivendell, and they're traveling in the mountains, and there is a horrific thunderstorm, which is just honestly the thunder giants throwing giant boulders at each other, and it's hysterical because they're all like, "We're gonna die. Yeah, we need to find shelter, otherwise the debris from these thunder giants is gonna kill us, so let's go." So the dwarves are dumb, and they find a cave, and they don't check the cave properly, despite saying that they did do just that. It gives you some insight into dwarvish personalities, I should say. And basically they get attacked by goblins repeatedly, taken to the Goblin King. Gandalf saves them. It's a situation, and got some more songs. And then there's just this one hysterical part in this particular chapter that makes me laugh so hard, and it is, why did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back. "Why, oh why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bomber, who was fat and staggered along with the sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. It's just so funny. I love the comedic relief that is just scattered in through these dramatic moments. It just brings me so much joy. And then that chapter, of course, ends on a cliffhanger. And Bilbo falls down a hole and is knocked out. Riddles in the Dark Time, also known as Chapter 5. And I have a lot to say about this chapter. I have less to say about Chapter 6, so just bear with me. So, Riddles in the Dark is probably my favorite chapter, first of all. Second of all, when I was in 5th grade, I actually ended up writing a paper on this specific chapter because we had to pick any chapter in a book or a character or something and analyze it or write a report about it or something. And I chose to do Riddles in the Dark from The Hobbit because I love it so much. I actually have quite a bit to say about this, and I also saw this time with a different set of eyes, and I just love this chapter so much. One of my favorite parts of this chapter is when Bilbo pulls out his little dagger, and he realized that it was like the elven swords. It was an elven blade because it glows blue, or it glows in the dark to warn you about danger that's coming. And he's like, oh, well, that's good to know. And then he just kind of decides where to go from there. And then he meets Gollum. And I'll talk about Gollum at length in a minute, but I want to get through like my favorite parts first. And they play a game of riddles, and I love this chapter primarily because of the riddles. They're just so much fun, and they give you a lot of insights into the characters and the places that they grew up, and it's also just fun trying to guess what the answers are. I mean, clearly you can just read ahead and figure it out, but sometimes, like when I was younger, I would just try and guess. I would try and figure it out before I got through. Some of them I got, some of them I'm just like, I have no idea. I've always had mixed results with riddles. Sometimes I'm really good at them, sometimes I'm less good at them. And then we get to the notorious line where Bilbo says, "What is in my pocket?" Because he finds the ring earlier in the chapter, and that sets off a whole bunch of things, and ultimately that's kind of where Bilbo's arc starts to get a lot more interesting. Because the thing about this ring is it's a ring of power. Anyone who wears it becomes invisible and can do all kinds of things. And it is Gollum's most prized possession. Now, the thing that's interesting about The Hobbit is you don't get the whole story about the ring. You find out, of course, more about it in The Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion and everything. And if you've read those or watched the movies, you know that this is the One Ring. It is evil, it's corruptible, it's not a good time. But the way that the ring is portrayed in this book is just kind of like a fun thing. You wear the ring, you become invisible, it allows you to do things, and there's nothing exactly evil about it. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but just the parallels between Bilbo and Gollum are really interesting. And I just really noticed it this time, basically. So anyway, what have I got in my pocket? Gives him 3 tries, Gollum can't get it. And when he finds out it's gone, he is really, really not happy about it. Understandably so. And another interesting part that I really enjoyed was later in the chapter when Bilbo is trying to get away from Gollum. He has this moment where he contemplates killing him and or leaving him alive, and he just pauses and takes a look at him for a moment while he's invisible, and he realizes that he pities him, and he has just Bilbo has this compassionate side to him that is just like, I don't want to kill this creature. I don't want to hurt him. And it's interesting because Bilbo's literally fleeing for his life here. If he was, visible, he would be attacked and killed by Gollum. But, that moment of invisibility allows him to take a step back and assess the situation differently and take a look at Gollum for what he is. And he's just like, you know what? No, I'm not going to kill him. And then we get to Gollum's kind of main phrase. Thief, 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 Baggins, we hates it. We hates it. We hates it forever. I could do the voice, but I don't really want to right now. Maybe later. But then, Bilbo ultimately ends up escaping. And that's kind of how the chapter ends, but, there's so much more to it. So as I said before, I wanted to talk about Gollum as a character. Now, these ideas that I'm gonna spout are nothing really new, but it's interesting because a lot of people see Gollum as this creepy, awful creature. But what a lot of people fail to realize is that he is kin of Bilbo. He is Hobbit-like, and it just has a similar past. And that's one thing I love about the scene with the riddles. It's like they both are familiar with the same riddles, and they know the answers. They might have to think about them for a minute, but they're familiar with the kinds of riddles. They know the rules of the game. They know that this game is generally a sacred thing. So that gives Gollum a bit of humanity in a way. Because a lot of people, as I said, just see him as this creepy creature. But he was once like Bilbo. And you don't necessarily know that 100% in this book, but you find it out a little bit later that he is a fisher folk, which are very, very similar to hobbits. And I just want to talk about what I think Gollum actually represents. Yes, he is a tortured, sad creature, but you forget Tolkien went to war and he saw all of these horrible, horrible, awful things. Almost all of his friends died, I think all except one. He watched all the horses he trained die, and it really bothered him. And Gollum, I think, represents that despair and that sadness and that deep hurt and horror, in him. So you don't live through something like that and be completely fine. It's gonna stay with you forever. And I really see Gollum as a representation of that horror. He was once, as I said, similar to Bilbo, but then through his obsession and dealings with this ring of power, it corrupted his soul and it made him hate everything. But then, as we saw here, there are glimpses of what he used to be still. As I said, he's familiar with these riddles. He was having fun with the game. He was enjoying playing it with Bilbo. But because of his hurts and the horrors that he has dealt with, and the treatment that the ring and the people of the dark kind of have treated him as, he is not what he once was. And I think that's important to keep in mind when reading his character, because yes, he is this creepy creature, but at the same time, he's one of the most complex characters I have ever read. And I'm not even lying about that. He is one of the most complex characters I have ever read, and I don't want to say I love him, but I have a deep fascination for him and for what he represents and what he is and what he's become. And that brings up the interesting parallel between Bilbo and Gollum. And that parallel is, as I've already said multiple times, Gollum is what Bilbo used to be, or what Bilbo is. Bilbo is this jovial, happy, carefree hobbit, and Gollum used to be like that. But then he got a hold of this ring, and it changed him. And now Bilbo has this ring in a weird, ironic twist of fate. A similar creature picks up this ring of power, has it, and it's interesting just seeing that cycle repeat again. And ultimately, if Bilbo gives in to its power and lets it kind of take over his soul, he'll become like what Gollum is. And I find that eerily fascinating. And it's something I really never paid attention to before reading this again. So I mean, this kind of once again goes towards you guys think this is a children's story, but honestly, it's very much not a children's story in a lot of ways. You can read so much more into it, especially if you get to know the man, Tolkien, the man behind the story. So anyway, that brings us to out of the frying pan into the fire, which basically reunites Bilbo and his dwarf buds and Gandalf. He uses the ring to sneak back into camp. They don't know that he has this ring of power. Then they go into the woods and have an encounter with some wolves, which is, always a good time. Then they climb a tree, and it's just the wolf encounter. There's this one line in particular that's really amusing. It says, "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he said. And it became a proverb, though we now say, "Out of the frying pan into the fire," in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. And I just love that the chapter title is in the text. I always enjoy that. Like when the title of the book shows up somewhere in the book, or the chapter title shows up in the actual text. I just love seeing that. It's a little thing, but it's something that I enjoy regardless. And then later in the chapter, we get to meet the Eagles, which I have always enjoyed because, reading his other works, you know that there's a lot more to the Eagles and that they have a lot more complexity to them than at first blush. Like, they have specific rules for a lot of reasons, but they helped out the company in this specific book, and it's just amusing to me, just getting to see them break that rule. But they go and save the hobbits from the goblins and the wolves. And there's another goblin song, which is always a joy. You guys know at this point that I love the music and the poems and the riddles and things. And then we get to the part where we find out that the Eagles, the Lord of the Eagles, and Gandalf have a kind of friendship. And they're just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And yes, they do have a friendship. Yeah, there's a lot more to Gandalf and the Eagles than you originally know or think about. But I love it because it's just like, it seems that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the Eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. And it's just like, yes, you have that history there between them. You don't necessarily know the full story, but you know that there is more to them. And I just love those little smatterings from other works that just get thrown in. It's just a delight. Chapter 7, which is Queer Lodgings. This is the chapter all about Bjorn, which I enjoy thoroughly. So the first thing about this chapter that I absolutely love is the farewell between the eagles and Gandalf. It's just the best. So when they say, you know, farewell, they cried, wherever you fare, till your eyries receive you at the journey's end. That is the polite thing to say among eagles. And then the response is, may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks. There's just something about that I love so much. It's just so beautiful, almost. And I just thoroughly enjoy that. And then next thing that I always enjoy is just getting to meet Bjorn and just learning his story. He's just such an interesting character, and you can really see where Tolkien pulled on the lore and mythology and culture from like all over the world, because not a lot of people know that. They just automatically think he pulled on Western things, but no, Bjorn is kind of based in Native American lore and everything. But then we also start getting into the Beowulf things. And I have some images in my edition of The Hobbit, and it looks exactly like the Beowulf halls that I imagine. Perfect for storytelling and whatnot. And just Beorn likes to show off his prowess and his bravery and just who he is, because he's, you know, a shape changer. And it's just an interesting time just getting to see that parallel between them. And also, as an aside, I would love to go to Beorn's house, because all the food that he gives and everything just sounds absolutely delightful, and I want it. And I love the description of they sat long at the table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and the torches were put out. And still they sat, in the light of the dancing flames, with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, and dark at the top of the trees of the forest. Whether it was magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he heard a sound like the wind in the branches stirring in the rafters and the hoot of owls. Soon he began to nod with sleep, and the voices seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. Just that passage is so vivid and gorgeous and just lovely and atmospheric, and I live. Then we get some lovely dwarf songs, which you guys know I love. Then Gandalf leaves, and he brings in discussion about the necromancer in the south, which, as we know who that is. If you've read The Lord of the Rings or watched the movies or whatever, you know who that is. And the fact that they're bringing it up now is absolutely fascinating, because he's not a big player in this story, but, you know, he's still got his finger in everything all the time. So I just really like that nod to it, that even though things aren't the absolute worst that they could possibly be, they're still stirrings of evil always. And then that brings us to chapter 8, which is Flies and Spiders. And this chapter is honestly a ride. This chapter really brings out Bilbo's story arc. Like, he does a complete 180, changes completely, because, and as you'll hear later in the chapter, he stabs a spider, guys. Like, he has really grown into his own. And now, this is just a little thing that I like to bring up every once in a while, but I love that it is basically canon that Thorin is visually impaired. Like, he needs glasses, guys. Like, and this passage is a prime example of that. It says, 12 yards. I should have thought it was 30 at least, but my eyes don't see as well as they used to 100 years ago. Still, 12 yards is good as a mile. We can't jump it and we can't dare try to wade or swim. So, I mean, it's just like, that is actually canon. Like, he cannot see. Then also, just this other little one. It's not like anything big or anything, but it says, Bomber slept on with a smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed him. And it's like, yeah, sleep is a good escape for your problems sometimes. And I can't help but wonder how often Tolkien used sleep to escape himself. Yeah, that's just a little observation I made, maybe. Then I love the part where Bilbo climbs the tree and he goes up into the world, feels the breeze, sees the butterflies and the spiders and everything up there. It's just, that imagery is absolutely stunning. I don't want to read the whole paragraph because it's really long, but it's the one that starts with the, in the end, he poked his head above the roof of leaves, and then he found spiders all right. But they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. And then it continues on, and then it ends with the, I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the top of oak woods, but these were not purple at all. They were a dark, dark, velvety black without any markings to be seen. Just that whole paragraph is visually stunning, and I absolutely love that. Like, in contrast with the dark, grim forest that they're in, just getting that glimpse of beauty and light and joy is just absolutely lovely. Then later in the chapter, as I said, we get to deal with some spiders who we don't know about this at this point, but if you've read the Silmarillion, you know about the origin of the spiders and their whole deal. But these are all the spawn of that specific spider kind of a thing. And Bilbo, being the bamf that he is, it says, Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and struck it with its sword right in the eyes. And we love that for Bilbo. Like, he's just really grown, and I love that we get to see his story and everything, but also just like parallel that with the end of Two Towers with Shelob. Just it's quality. We love it. And then he names his little dagger sword Sting. And I just love that. I love that. And then the Adder Cop song is just so fun and taunting. Like, when I was a kid, I would often try to come up with melodies if I wasn't listening to the audiobook and reading along. But this one in contrast with the dwarf songs, like the dwarf songs I always kind of, when I was younger, I thought they were more jovial and happy, but now I think of them more as dirge-like. But the one that Bilbo is doing is very taunting and very, just the opposite of a dirge. And it's just a delight to read. And then we get to the part where Thorin gets to escape the forest because he was captured by the Elf King. And he is getting to eat things and getting to rest despite being in a jail cell while his comrades are still caught in the forest. About Barrels Out of Bond, which is chapter 9, is just how fun it is and how high stakes it is without being a huge concern. The thing that makes me laugh the most, though, is when they are talking to the king and he's just like, "It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you were in my kingdom using the road that my people made? Did you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have a right to know what brings you here, and if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in a prison until you have learned sense and manners." It's just funny because of all the legal stuff that is just thrown in randomly. It's just a great time. And then Bilbo just really comes to his own in this chapter again. Like, he's just, at peak burglar stage. Like, he comes up with this brilliant plan to roll out the barrel, basically. And I love that part, and I love the song that goes with it. It's just a delight. It's such a jovial, happy song, and it's just lovely. Just all of the songs in this chapter are great. And then they ultimately get to the lake town, and that brings us to chapter 10, which is a warm welcome. And this is another filler-ish chapter that gives us a lot of background as to what this town, which is close to the mountain, is like, and what it used to be like. And it gives us all this historical background and everything, and I really liked learning about that. Like, it says, those lands had changed much since the days when dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a very shadowy tradition. And then it just kind of goes on from there. Just the history is really interesting. They used to be a really big trading town and had a lot of a good relationship with the dwarves, but ever since smog, whatever, took over, they've become less prosperous, and like, they still do trade, but they're not a very wealthy town. They're not as prosperous as they once were. And another thing that I really like about that chapter is it's very Beowulf-esque with the way that everything happens. Like, they meet, they have, you know, songs about the dwarves, first of all, and then at the very end of the chapter they say, let them go and bother Smaug and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, O Thorn Thrain's son, Thor's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So it's like, you know, well, that's not exactly what he meant. Like, when he was thinking about it, he's like, we need to get these dwarves out of here. He, you know, it's just very reminiscent, like, we're going to help this king and restore him to his glory and everything. And it's just, I don't know, it just has a lot of Beowulf essences to it. We get to chapter 11, which is like the biggest filler chapter. It's just a very suspenseful chapter. They're very despairing. They're like about ready to give up because they climb the mountain. They're trying to find the door, and they can't find it. But it also is just a very big change in tone in this chapter, because it says, they were come to the desolation of the dragon, and they were come at the waning of the year. And just that specific sentence just gives me so many like chills and sense of foreboding, because it's like, yes, they've made it this far, but their biggest hurdle, their biggest battle is yet to come, and they don't have much time to do it. And then another lovely thing that happens in this chapter is the reminiscence of where they were at the beginning of the journey. Like, when they say, there was not a doorstep, of course, really, but they used to call the little grassy space between the wall and the opening the doorstep in fun, remembering Bilbo's words long ago and the unexpected party in his Hobbit hole, when he said they could sit on the doorstep till they thought of something. And sit and think they did, or wandered aimlessly about, and glummer they became. And I just love that tie back into the beginning of the book. Another thing that Tolkien does that normally irritates me is he like starts to explain something, but then he's like, you know, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And while this is something that I tend not to enjoy in books, he does it well. He does it in such a way where it's like, yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of tidbit of this information now and kind of like tell you what's going to happen, but then I will explain it further later. It's just, I don't know, it's a way to kind of hook the reader in and make you want to keep reading in a weird way. Whereas like in other books, it's just like, yeah, there's hintings that I'm going to tell you about something, and I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be about. But I will tell you about it later, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to tell you about it later. I'm like, no, tell me about it now. But I like the way that he does it, because he doesn't do it in a way that irritates me. And then the last thing is they end up answering the riddle, like from the beginning with the map. You know how the moon runes had that riddle on there for them as to how to open the door. Well, we get that riddle solved when there's an old thrush that comes through, and ultimately then the moon comes out and shines on the door, and they are able to go inside. Chapter 12, which is Inside Information. This is a fun chapter because they get to finally go back into their home. And some of the passages that I really, really like in this chapter are, the first thing is, the most that can be said for the dwarves is this: they intended to pay Bilbo really handsomely for his services. They had brought him to do a nasty job for them, and they did not mind the poor fellow doing it if he would. But they would all have done their best to get him out of trouble if he got into it, and they did in the case of the trolls at the beginning of their adventures, before they had any particular reasons for being grateful to him. There it is. Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk, with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots. Some are not, but are decent enough people, like Thorn and company, if you don't expect too much. And the thing I like about that specific passage is, it's just talking about dwarves and what they're like, and just giving us an idea of their temperament and their overall mindset about certain things. And overall, they're not a bad people, but they are very protective of the things that they deem to be theirs. They made a promise to Bilbo, and that's a promise that they're going to keep. And I just really liked that glimpse into dwarven lore. They send Bilbo inside, and he gets to go explore. And Bilbo runs in and grabs a goblet from under the dragon's nose, and he brings it out to the dwarves, and they're all excited about getting to see things. Then he gets sent back in, and Bilbo is he's so frustrated because they're expecting him to, bring more things out. And Bilbo is just really angry, and he really stands up for himself, and that's something I kind of liked. And he said, "What else do you suppose a burglar's supposed to do?" asked Bilbo angrily. "I was not engaged to kill dragons, that is warriors' work, but to steal treasure. I made the best beginning I could. Did you expect me to trot back with the whole horde of Thror on my back?" And it's just like, yeah, that's probably kind of what they expected from you. It's like, I am one person. I can't do all of this stuff on my own. I need help. And if you wanted more, you should have hired more burglars than just the one, just me. Or, you could have come and helped me yourselves. So he's just really frustrated. And honestly, I don't blame him. And, but they do send him back in, and then we get our first encounter with Smaug. And I actually love this. This scene is probably my second favorite in the whole book. The first, of course, being Riddles in the Dark. But this one, I really like. And I thought the movie was done, they did this part really well, but it is probably 100% Ben and Martin doing their thing. They just have such great chemistry. They always have. But anyway, this specific passage is just such a delight. It says, "Well, thief, I smell you and I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along, help yourself again. There's plenty to spare." And I love Smaug, actually. I know that's probably weird that you like the villain, but no, I love him. He's just such an arrogant, snarky, conceited dragon. And he just totally has a Napoleonic complex because, in Tolkien's worlds, he is the smallest dragon that was created. Smaug is just a little pipsqueak compared to the rest. But Bilbo is a smart fellow, and he knows a lot more than you think he does about dragons. He knows that you need to shower them with compliments, and that you need to distract them, and you never, ever give them your name, because that will be the end of you. gives himself epithets, kind of like in Beowulf. And that's one thing about this specific chapter that's a delight, is it is very reminiscent of Beowulf in a lot of ways. You can tell where Tolkien got a lot of his inspiration for this chapter from, and I love it. Love it, love it. And then the conversation turns to revenge, and Smaug says, "Revenge," he snorted, and the light in his eyes lit the hall from floor to ceiling like scarlet lightning. "Revenge! The king under the mountain is dead, and where are his kin that dare seek revenge? Girion, lord of Dale, is dead, and I have eaten his people like wolf among sheep. And where are his sons that dare approach me? I kill where I wish, and none dare resist. I laid low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Then I was but a young and tender. Now I am old and strong, strong, strong. Thief in the shadows," he gloated. "My armor is like tenfold shields. My teeth are swords, my claws spears, the shock of my tail a thunderbolt, my wings a hurricane, and my breath death." It's like, Smaug, you are a freaking drama queen. Just chill. Like, I get it. Your Napoleonic complex is coming on extra strong here. But, like, yo, you need to just chill. And just when you read his dialogue, it is honestly, like, it's supposed to be terrifying, but it's like some of the funniest stuff. And I take great delight in it. He's a ride. And then it continues, and then we get one of my favorite lines of the whole book, and it says, "Never laugh at live dragons, Bilbo, you fool," he said to himself, and it became a favorite saying of his later and passed into a proverb. I love that line. It's just great. And then another thing that I really like is when he goes out and he explains to the dwarves what's going on, we get to learn some lore about the old days again, like about the thrushes and the bird speak, and the conversations that they would have, that these birds were kind of used as messenger birds. Then we finally get the first mention of this thing called the Arkenstone, and the Arkenstone is one of the most important stones to dwarven culture. I think particularly to the Blue Mountain dwarves. It is like their heart and center. It is Thorin's most important thing. And I was talking with Vendi, as I did throughout this whole buddy read, and she thinks it might be a Silmaril. And honestly, I would buy that 100%. That makes complete sense. Now, I won't go into much detail about that because this isn't the conversation for it. But if you've read Silmarillion and The Hobbit and all of Tolkien's work, and you have more thoughts on this theory, please come and talk to me about it, because it's absolutely wild, and I kind of love it, Which brings us to 13, which is not at home. Smaug has left the building, and the dwarves are kind of going inside, and there's this one passage talking about Bilbo, and it is the most relatable thing in the entire world. And it says, "There he lay face downwards on the floor, and he did not dare to get up, or hardly even to breathe, but nothing moved." Y'all, if that ain't me on a daily basis, I don't know what is. Because I too lay on the floor and don't move for long periods of time. Not even remotely joking about that. And then they find the Arkenstone, and Bilbo, in what is a great stupidity and also a very big power move, decides to take it for himself. Great job, Bilbo. Really love that for you. He wants to take it for his 14th share, but then he finds out that it means something to the dwarves, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna keep this for a little while. I'll tell him about it later. But then the dwarves give him a coat of mail, which is called mithril, and it's really like precious, important stuff. And I just love the tie-in because, as you know, in the Lord of the Rings, Frodo inherits said mithril, and it ultimately saves his life, like, I don't know how many times, but I just always get a little emotional when I see that, and think about all of the things that it's going to do in the future, like just that specific one. And then just this delightful line kind of towards the end of the chapter about this stuff called cram. It's just kind of thrown in there, and it makes me laugh because it's just like, dude, in the middle of talking about them going on this journey thing, you're talking about this biscuit thing called cram, and it's just hysterical to me. Then he just puts it in the middle of the chapter like that. So then we get to 14, which is fire and water. And this is the one and only chapter that is told from someone else's point of view. It is not following the dwarves or Thorin at all. This takes us to the lake town of Esgaroth with our pal Bard. And it is interesting because they ultimately end up killing the dragon. This fellow named Bard kills this dragon with this special arrow. He has this conversation with the thrush, and his arrow strikes true and ultimately kills the dragon. And the people of the town want to make him their king. They say, "Bard is not lost," he cried. "He dived from Esgaroth when the enemy was slain. I am Bard of the line of Girion, and I am the slayer of the dragon." And it's just very, once again, kind of reminiscent of the Beowulf myth, just with that specific hero and everything. And the master is sketchy, and he wants to put all the blame on the dwarves for their misfortune. And Bard is just like, you know what? Chill. It's not their fault that they were displaced from their home. They, have a right to this. So, I mean, like, we can have a conversation about this later. We should focus on rebuilding our town because that's more important than anything else. And then there's a bit of foreshadowing that says, "That will be the last we shall hear of Thorn Oakenshield, I fear," said the king. "He would have done better to have remained my guest. It is an ill wind all the same," he added, "that blows no one any good." And this is the Elven King talking because he's helping Esgaroth rebuild. But if you've read this before, you'll know that that's kind of quite a bit of foreshadowing. And then that brings us to chapter 15, which is the gathering of the clouds. And this is the chapter where Kark comes into play, the discussion of the birds that we had earlier. Well, they meet this 150-year-old bird, and I am concerned about him because they sent him to go and deliver a message, and he's an old bird, and I worry about him. But alas, he goes and delivers that message, and he's also the one who tells them that Smaug is dead. So they get to rejoice about that, and the irony of it all is that they didn't even do the killing themselves. They are the ones who embarked on this quest, and they're not even the ones that slayed the dragon that was, taking over their horde. Then we get them down in the lake town, and there's some celebration and some song singing and everything, and I of course marked all of the song singing, and they are having a conversation about splitting things, because there used to be this long-standing relationship between the dwarves and the people of Lake Town, and they want them to bring that tradition back. And Thorin's like, no. He's feeling quite a bit of the lust and the greediness of the gold and everything that has like that effect on them. And it's kind of interesting, and this is something that I've brought up maybe in other videos, but you know, I've talked about how like literally all the wars that you can possibly think about all throughout history can be are explained by 4 different things: power, ignorance, greed, or sex. All wars were started for one of those reasons: pigs. It's just something interesting to keep in mind. Then we get to chapter 16, which is A Thief in the Night, also known as Bilbo is Stupid, but I understand his motivations chapter. Bilbo goes to the elves and the Lake Town people, and he offers them the Arkenstone as leverage. And so, I mean, he goes like this. He says, but I have an interest in this matter, 1/14 share to be precise, according to a letter, which fortunately I believe I have kept. He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, crumpled and much folded, Thorin's letter that had been put under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. That passage always makes me kind of chuckle, especially these days, because it's just like, you are such a lawyer, Bilbo. Oh my God. You have this agreement in writing, you carry it with you, you memorialized it, and now you're telling people about it like, hey, I have an interest in this too, so, like, okay, Bilbo, I get it. It's just so funny to see all of those kinds of references on this reread. It is very funny to me. And then, as I said, Bilbo gives them the Arkenstone. It says, "This is the Arkenstone of Thrain," said Bilbo, "the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining." Then Bilbo, not without a shudder, not without a glance of longing, handed the marvelous stone to Bard, and he held it in his hand as though dazed. Everyone is just becoming, you know, enchanted by this stone. And once again, it brings back the power, ignorance, greed, and sex thing. Like, this is greed at its peak. Everybody is affected by it, and it's ironic because people aren't affected by the ring. They're being affected by this stone that I honestly now believe is Silmaril, and I will never get over that, ever, because some of them were lost. Chapter 17, which is The Clouds Burst, and this is the battle chapter, the Battle of the 5 Armies. And at the beginning of this chapter, Thorin and co find out about Bilbo's betrayal, and it is extremely, extremely heartbreaking. But this passage in particular is absolutely heartbreaking. It says, "Be off," called Thorin. "You have mail upon you which was made of my folk, and is too good for you. It cannot be pierced by arrows, but if you do not hasten, I will sting your miserable feet. So be swift." And he's clearly furious and upset and feels so incredibly betrayed by what Bilbo did by giving away the Arkenstone. And he's just disgusted that someone in his company, someone he considered a friend, that would do that behind his back. And it's like, I understand why Bilbo did it. He did it because he was, you know, trying to resolve the issues between these entities without having a conflict, but in a way he made it just so much worse. I mean, the dwarves like are understandably upset because like they were displaced from their homes and all of their possessions were taken from them, and you know, there's very little people that they can trust, and to have someone that close to them betray them in the exact way that they were betrayed in the first place, like, it is understandable why they are hurt. And it's really, really sad and upsetting, quite frankly. As we said, we get to the battle, which I really like reading because, you know, as you guys know at this point, Tolkien was in a war. So reading these scenes from someone who actually went to war They're just that much more realistic, and you can tell he drew on his personal knowledge. And there's a lot of passages that talk about it, and yeah, it's really quite a lot, frankly. But then Bilbo, he talks about what a terrible battle it was. Like, here's an example. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all of Bilbo's experiences, and the one which at the time he hated most, which is to say, it was the one he was most proud of, and most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. And, he talks about just how much he didn't like that. And I wonder how much of Bilbo's experience during this battle was pulling on Tolkien's own, because it's really rough to read, frankly. And I hate it. I hate it so much. And so then we get quite a bit of descriptions of the battle. And then we get the famous line that gets shouted many a times. The eagles, he shouted. The eagles are coming. And as you guys know, that is something that is said a lot in the Lord of the Rings movies, also the books. The fact that Bilbo also says it is great. And then our poor boy gets knocked out and doesn't know what ends up happening. Then we get to chapter 18, which is a very, very emotional chapter, and it always rips my heart and stomps on it. Bilbo is found post-battle, and then we find out that, Thorin is dying, and that both Fili and Kili have died, which is just extra tragic. We find out that Fili and Kili laid down their lives to save and to shield Thorin from harm, and they ended up getting killed in the process, and it's so sad. And then, Bilbo gets to go into the tent and say his farewell to Thorin, and they part on good terms, because as he says, farewell, good thief, said he. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers, until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver, and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate. And it's just so sad, because, but also good because Bilbo did get that closure. Like, can you imagine if Thorin died and the last things Bilbo said to him were in anger, and he had to carry that with him for the rest of his life? Like, that would just be an absolute tragedy, and I hate thinking about it, honestly. And Bilbo tries to not take the gold and silver, but Gandalf's like, no, I think you're gonna need at least some of it, so you better take it with you. So he does. But the thing that is also really interesting is the coming together of all of the people. The elves and the dwarves don't like each other. And Bard and the Elf King and Thorin were the ones who kind of started this war amongst themselves over the Arkenstone and the riches. And yet his death kind of brought everyone together in a way, like, as tragic as it is, and as awful under circumstances as it is, they all come together to pay their respects. Bard says some great words about him, and then the Elven King says, upon his tomb, the Elven King then laid Oakrist, the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. And, it's just that's showing, like, that he's, paying his own respects in that weird way. Even though, like, he treated him like garbage and is an entitled elf. Because, let's be completely frank, the Elf King of Mirkwood is not great. But, in that one moment, it's like they realize that, we are here. We are one You know, we are all people. It's like that one line that Mary says in The Lord of the Rings, you know, we're all a part of this world. All of us. And we're all fighting for good, you know? We are all part of this. We're all in this together. Why are we fighting each other? Like, we're all of a common people, you know what I mean? Like, we might be different races and come from different backgrounds, but we still have a stake in the same thing. And I think that is really encapsulated in this specific farewell scene with Thorin, as heartbreaking as it is. And then I always love the line that Bilbo says, that if you're ever passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. I always love that line. It just brings me such joy and delight. And it's really lovely. I mean, he says farewell to the dwarves, but it's not a forever farewell. It's I'll see you later kind of a thing, because there are promises that he would come back, or that they would reunite again at some point. And then I just love this specific line. It's just very beautiful. It says, so comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending, said Bilbo. And he turned on his back on his adventure. Like, that just is such a great line. And I mean, like, the rest of the paragraph too, but just that line in particular really is gorgeous. And then we get to chapter 19, which is the last chapter, called The Last Stage. And a lot of it is merrymaking in Rivendell, and also Gandalf kind of giving us what happened to him, brief overview of what happened to him. And it appears that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. Ere long now, Gandalf was saying, the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed from that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish he were banished from the world. And, you know, it's very telling, because it's just foreshadowing what's going to happen later in The Lord of the Rings. They're talking about Sauron, even though they don't use his name in this book. That's who they are talking about. And it's just, it just kind of shows that, like, while evil might be somewhat dormant for the moment, it will always return. And then we get to one of my all-time favorite songs, and that's The Road Goes Ever On and On, that Bilbo comes up with. And I absolutely love that song. Just, it's a lovely song. And then Gandalf even comments on it. He says, my dear Bilbo, he said, something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were. And no, he is very clearly not. You don't see the things that he's seen and experience the things that he's experienced and not be changed by it. And then, you know, he goes home, and he finds that people have proclaimed him dead and are selling his things, and his relatives are trash. And I'm like, can relate. I can absolutely relate. And then as the chapter comes to a close and the book comes to a close, it's visited by Balin and Gandalf, and they're talking about their journeys. It's like, the thing I love about the ending is, like, you know, while no one else around him understands what he went through, the people who come to visit him do. And I don't know, it's just a very fitting end, and it leaves an open ending for all of the things that are to come later. And I love this book so much. Like, just this video is only a small capsule in time of what my feelings on this book are, and it is only talking about my feelings on this reread, at least in part. Because, you know, it is a timeless book. It's a book that I will reread over and over and over again and get something out of every single time. Like, I saw this book very differently on this read than I had in previous reads. And, you know, it's wonderful that I get to have that experience. And, you know, I tabbed my whole journey along the way, and I just absolutely loved doing this. And I hope you guys got something out of this if you made it all the way to the end. But, you know, I could go on and on. The road goes ever on and on about this book. But I think for now I'm going to leave this here. If you guys have read The Hobbit, please don't hesitate to come and talk to me down in the comments about it, or feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I love talking to people about this book and about Tolkien in general, so definitely do that if you were so inclined. But other than that, you guys know the drill. I have all of my social media links down below in the description, and I will catch you later for the next adventure soon. Bye! Far over the misty mountains cold, to a dungeon steep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light.